So the farm is 40 acres, and we chose this farm to buy this farm about 15 years ago so that we could raise our horses, and that was the primary reason to come to this farm, was for the horses. And so the growing of vegetables was immediately after the horses arrived. But anyway, it's 40 acres, and it sits in an area that is it's on a dead-end road, so it's private area, but not too far from the city, really. So we like this place a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And how many acres are certified organic?
The number of acres certified organic is something like 3/4. I think it's 3/4. It's a handful. 3/4 of an acre is more than enough for what I do.
Yeah.
I don't think I could handle any more.
Sure.
I maintain the whole property as organic, but I only really grow vegetables on 3/4 of an acre. Mainly, I've been growing. I'm growing right now, specializing in root crops like garlic and ginger and turmeric. So specifically, those 3 crops are my main crops right now. Although on my certification, I have a list of maybe 40 different crops. So I have greens and beans and legumes and a wide variety of crops, tomatoes, peppers, melons. But I've gotten away from growing those. I've grown them over the years, but I've gotten away from growing them. They're a lot of work, and it's easier in a sense to do with the root crops. The nice thing about root crops is that they are easily stored, and so they're not like a lettuce crop where you have to harvest and sell right away. I'm limited by having only one hoop house, and so crop rotations gets to be a big problem with just one hoop house. I really should have 3 hoop houses so that I can grow, because the ginger and turmeric do best in a hoop house, so it'd be best to have a nice 3-year program with 3 hoop houses. So 1 hoop house is actually a limitation in the crop rotation program. I have a 3-year rotation plan, typically. Again, now we're just doing the garlic, for example. So the garlic is never placed in the same bed. It's going to go 3 years before it's ever back in that bed, 3 or more years. The ginger and turmeric are following the same rotation. I've been doing some other crops that I haven't been selling, at least not much of. So greens, I like a lot of salad greens, kale, arugula, things like that. Those crops, which are out there and are part of my plan, those also go on a 3-year cycle. So they're never back in the same place for 3 years. And then in between, so there might be garlic in 1 year, there might be greens in another year, and then maybe a manure application, or else a green manure, something like, I like to plant either clover, red clover, or hairy vetch. So I've been using some other crops like that to give the soil a break, so, and also to replace nitrogen. Yeah. So that's the kind of rotation I go through. Awesome. So maybe a couple of years of a crop, followed by a green manure or real manure, depending. So the manure is never placed in the same place either every year. I rotate the manure around. The manure that comes from the horses is very high in phosphorus, and luckily the crops like turmeric and ginger consume a great deal of phosphorus, so that's one of the it is a very good compatibility between that type of soil amendment, if I can use that word to call the manure as a soil amendment, that has high in phosphorus, so the ginger and turmeric need that, but also things like like kale and arugula don't need that much phosphorus, so you have to have a balance. You need crops that can pull stuff back out too, so you don't build up too much. So this is garden space that in the past few years I've had strawberries growing there. So I've taken the strawberries out and I'm going to move them elsewhere. So this area hasn't had any compost treatment for several years, and So I'm just gonna keep it out of production, which is another thing you have to do in organic. You have to deal with the fact that not every last inch of property can be a cash crop. You have to go through rotations. You need to give your soil opportunities to see different things. So it's okay. I have 40 acres if I want to spread out anyway. And if I need the space, I have it. But for this area, it's about a 30-foot by 100-foot area that I'm going to cover with the tarp there.
My name is Dr. Chris Murakami. I'm an assistant professor of agroecology at Chatham University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I also help manage the agroecology demonstration garden there, and based out of the Eden Hall campus, which is about 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh. Based on the description of the crop rotation and integration of cover crops and things of that nature, it seems like they're doing a great job in terms of being able to do what they can, given the kind of limited real estate available under the hoop house.
In terms of types of pest, weeds are probably the biggest in that group of problems. A lot of pests can be managed, but weeds are a lot harder to manage. Just grass, and then because we have horses, we also bring in the hay that the horses eat. Brings in weed seeds from wherever.
Yeah.
And I'm also composting that manure and applying it in the garden areas. So those weed seeds end up here, and I would say the biggest pressure there is going to be dockweed, D-O-C-K, dockweed. Dockweed is if you've ever heard of it, it's a weed. It has a long root, very deep root. It'd be like it might look like a large carrot in terms of the root. But it's the type of root that if you chop it up a little bit, each little piece will then sprout more. So it's very difficult to get rid of. It's worse than a dandelion. It's like just that kind of a plant. So dockweed. Another one that I have trouble with is bindweed. Bindweed is a weed that grows underground. It has a vine that's maybe 8 inches, 10 inches in the ground. It grows horizontally along the ground, and it then shoots up. And those shoots come up 8 to 10 inches to get to the surface, and then they produce a viney weed that can choke out crops. So bindweed is also very difficult to manage. Bindweed, I manage. I'm actually started a new method just this past summer. I've covered the area with plastic. So I have a certain area where it's been very intense with bindweed. In the past, I've tried to just till it at a very, very low depth to cut it up so that there's no greenery that's exposed. But last summer I decided I'll just put plastic down. So I've covered an area that's about 60 feet by 100 feet. So there's large plastic tarps covering this area. So the bindweed is not going to get any sun, has not seen sun for the fall and the spring. I'll open it up this summer, but I hope it will curtail it quite a bit by it not having any sunlight for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't expect 100% control of it this way. I think it would take maybe 2 years or 3 years of total no sunlight there. Really, that's how pervasive these root systems can be. But I think I can get it more manageable, which is the real goal. I mean, in the end, you have to live with diversity, and that's kind of the nice thing about organic farming. You just accept it. It's there, and you find a way. So dockweed, I've only been dig it up. Okay. Which sometimes means digging a shovel into the ground, 12 inches. Another neat thing about dockweed is, as I said, it's a very long root. But in the springtime, after there's a lot of rain, when the ground is very full of moisture and very soggy, you can just pull them right out. There's Because, there's typically a few days after a good rainstorm that if you have the time and you just go after it, you can get rid of them. So in the area where I garden and where I'm applying the manure, I've just been pulling them out. I'm also gonna try another technique again with plastic tarps where, and I'll do that later this spring. I'm gonna cover an area that I'm now applying some manure on that's gonna be through a compost process. So this is an area on the garden where I'm gonna work the manure into the soil. I'm gonna go ahead and cover that and go through a few cycles of opening it to the sun, letting things sprout, covering it again. And it's gonna go all summer like that. I'm not gonna plant any real cash crops there. I'm just gonna allow the weeds that are coming in with all that manure to get started, get covered up, let more get started, get covered up. And I think I can even stop the initial germination of the dockweed from getting established. So I'm going to test that out.
The manure application is definitely something to consider. The kind of continual introduction, possibly of weeds within the manure itself. The practice that the farmer is describing, like a combination of occultation and having kind of opportunity for those seeds to germinate, then get smothered again, and eventually kind of wear themselves out, is kind of a good practice to look at. Could definitely save time on labor if you have enough time to kind of get into to let those beds establish by kind of going through those cycles. There might be some strategies, using some form of shallow tillage and kind of going through a similar process of trying to get that stale seed bed. And kind of from there, then trying to minimize disturbance, so kind of more seeds aren't being brought up within that weed seed bank. It seems like in this context, having that access to the horse manure is a key resource, a key way to kind of cycle nutrients and have that kind of integration of the livestock in these vegetable production spaces. It may be a consideration of doing some kind of form of composting of the material before applying it into beds, especially if it's been pinpointed that the horse manure is indeed the kind of source of some of those weed seeds. So doing some of the hot composting of the manure could help make sure that those weed seeds have had ample time to break down, so that they're not an ongoing problem. And plenty of vegetable growers who may not have access to manure on site are going to be bringing in considerable finished compost. For a lot of small scale intensive vegetable growers, that's one of their biggest inputs that they have. And there are a number of strategies for kind of bed establishment in the kind of, there's a kind of growing wave of no-till or minimal till intensive vegetable production. And so sometimes that does start with the use of a tarp. So kind of mowing down pasture or the native grass that's there, occultation with silage tarp. And then depending upon kind of the soil conditions below the soil, whether or not there needs to be amendments, or there needs to be kind of breaking up of subsoil compaction. Some growers are laying down cardboard or a ram board, which is a kind of a cardboard product that breaks down over time. But so it's a cardboard or the ram board, a layer of compost, and depending on the crop, sometimes those crops could be grown directly within that first season after the grass has been killed, in a kind of like lasagna style of bed establishment. But that assumes that the kind of subsoil conditions are ideal for growers. So yeah, growers might find themselves in a number of different ways, but those kind of deep mulch compost systems or lasagna systems, in a way, just keep that this weed seed bank contained as much as possible. And then as long as there's kind of ongoing attention to try to minimize kind of soil horizon inversion and things like that, that could be part of a strategy to help keep weeds managed.
Well, the squash bugs, cucumber beetles, Japanese beetles,
Okay.
those three are extremely difficult to deal with, especially organically.
Yeah.
Those three, from an organic perspective, are a huge challenge.
Would it be different from a conventional perspective? Yeah.
Yeah, because there's chemicals out there that can take care of the problem, but things like Japanese beetle, that's a relatively new pest. I mean, within the last several years, as opposed to like 20 years ago, they weren't here. But the Japanese beetle, it can be killed with bacteria, which is an organic way to kill it. But there's, to my knowledge, no organic source of that bacteria at this point. So it gets difficult when you have no organic sources to treat them. Pests are a big challenge, which is another reason why I've gravitated toward the root crops like garlic, which is not a pest-friendly crop at all. There's basically no pest pressure on garlic or ginger and turmeric. Those other two crops are tropical crops, and pests around this area have not figured out what they are. They just avoid them.
The pest concerns that the farmer identified, not on the kind of target cash crops, but the squash bugs, cucumber beetles, and Japanese beetles, there aren't that many great kind of organic chemical control options, but the options tend to be more the use of insect netting or row cover, with kind of cucurbits in the case of squash and cucumber beetles, to try to keep give the plants a chance to get established before they become kind of really vulnerable to the cucumber beetles or to the squash bugs. And then I think particularly with the cucumber beetles, it would more come down to variety selection. Cucumber beetles, the big challenge with cucumber beetles is they're also carrying the bacterial wilt. And so there are some varieties of organically approved hybrid types that have some resistant to bacterial wilt that could be helpful. But with those, it's kind of part of having a holistic integrated pest management approach is going to be a great option. But having some of the preventive kind of physical barriers is a good strategy and approach to take. Japanese beetles, it's another challenging one. And there is even some contention related to the use of pheromone traps and things like that. A word of caution for those, if you really do need to keep the Japanese beetles off of some of the crops, is making sure that if you're actually, I'm not even completely sure if pheromone traps are allowable in the National Organic Program, but if those are something that are part of a toolkit, just making sure that they're in a location where they're not going to actually be bringing more Japanese beetles to a location. So paying attention to the way that the wind moves across the property and things like that, because there are some circumstances where those pheromone traps could actually be bringing in Japanese beetles from around an area, and thereby kind of like exposing your crops to even more damage. But it seems as if the farmer has already kind of worked through a good strategy here in focusing on crops that aren't as vulnerable to these pest issues. I think that there are some concerns with garlic, depending on the region that you have and the vulnerability to thrips. and also things like white rot. The thrips, to some extent, could be managed, but there might be kind of increased risk to some of that, given that it's a little bit of a controlled scenario. If the garlic is being grown in high tunnel. And then with the turmeric and ginger, I've experienced some concerns related to scale. But with turmeric and ginger being tropical crops, it might be a good idea to get familiar with what some of the vulnerabilities that these crops face in their kind of native context, just to assure that those haven't kind of made their way out to the region that you're growing in yet, as a way to try to minimize some of those losses.
A long time I sold vegetables at a farmer's market, and so at a farmer's market, it's always helpful to have a lot. The more you have, the more people are going to be attracted to your spots. So
Yeah. Variety or volume?
Variety.
Yeah.
Variety.
Yeah.
Variety is, it was my impression at the farmer's market is that a large variety will attract customers. If you offer just one thing, you run a big risk.
Yeah.
I was very successful once a few years ago at the farmer's market. The time of harvesting for garlic is right in July, and sometime latter part of July, after the garlic had gone through a drying process, I brought it up there, and that was all I was selling, was one item. And for that one day, I could sell a lot of garlic, but I was also convinced that I couldn't come back the next week and sell that volume, that people can buy garlic. And of course, it's a root crop, so you can also store it in your kitchen. And but yeah, most of the time, if you want to sell every week, you have to have a large variety. That's my impression of a farmer's market.
Sure.
And that's why I've kind of gotten away from it. There's a lot of great things about being a market farmer. You're meeting a lot of people, you're talking to a lot of people, you're having some true relationships with a lot of people. Plus you're doing a lot, hard work, which you think is really helping them. You're giving them vegetables that are hopefully they're enjoying as much as you've enjoyed producing them. So there's a lot to be said about market gardening, but on the other hand, there's a lot of rainy, cold Saturdays. And you wonder, hey, just because it's early November doesn't mean that things don't grow. So, but farmers markets are, a lot of scarcity of buyers during those days. Selling now through a wholesale organization,
Okay.
Kansas City Food Hub.
Okay.
So I sell wholesale, and this means I take a little bit of a cut in the price that I sell, because we're selling at the wholesale prices. However, we still get very good prices for the customers that we have at the for the Food Hub. I like this a lot better because, it's just a lot more convenient. I can decide what I want to harvest, and then they can sell it, and I don't have to worry about getting involved in spending the time with marketing my products.
Okay.
They do all the marketing. I, in a sense, pay them to do that marketing, and I'm happy to do that. The Food Hub is not all organic. My produce is all certified organic and is sold to customers as certified organic. And there are several other farmers in the Food Hub that are organic, but there are also some that are not. So when a customer places an order, they can see on the order page. It's a website, so they can see on the order page whether they're getting organic or not organic. And certain stores in this area will buy just organic, and so they can limit, as a customer on a website, they can limit their view to just the organic products and buy those.
Sure.
So, and that's typically where my produce will go, to the grocery stores that are organic grocery stores. So those stores are buying a lot more than just my garlic or ginger or turmeric.
Yeah.
They're buying other things. So our marketing person for the Food Hub can approach these stores and say, not only do we have garlic, ginger, turmeric, but we have sweet potatoes and any other 50 different things. So so there's a lot more volume that those stores are buying. So the wholesale market really comes in and says, hey, yeah, we need this stuff. Schools need this stuff. Stores and restaurants. There's a lot of people out there that are still shopping and needing produce. So
Yeah.
anyway, the wholesale market is there, and the food hub is a kind of place that helps move it that way.
My name is Mary Hendrickson, and I am a rural sociology professor here at the University of Missouri. But I also worked for 2 decades helping farmers and consumers and communities connect through locally produced food. So I've heard a lot of the success stories. I've heard a lot of the problems that people have in terms of marketing their wonderful, fresh, organic produce, vegetables or pecans or livestock meat or whatever it is. I've heard a lot of problems. So one of the solutions that we have advocated for and developed is a food hub. What is a food hub? Well, essentially, a food hub is a distributor. It is a place to aggregate product from multiple different growers and sell that product to multiple different consumers. So, what's the advantage for the farmer? The advantage for the farmer is that the farmers don't have to spend nearly as much time on marketing and distributing their product. And this is really important because often farmers are not that excited about the marketing side of the operation. So if a farmer can find a place where they can deliver all of their product all at once, it's really great. It's really wonderful, and people are really happy. However, farmers take less money, but there's one trip, there's one person to call, there's one invoice to develop, there's a lot less cost involved in delivering to one place. So the advantages are pretty clear: less time, less money. That's great. However, once a farmer starts to aggregate with others, so for instance, the Kansas City Food Hub aggregates from a number of different farmers. So are their practices the same? Are their quality standards the same? How is it being sorted? And sorted and packed so that you get all of the one size of tomatoes that the chefs love in one package versus other tomatoes that can be sold in a different way at a supermarket. What's the quality? What's the packaging? How does a farmer know where their product ends up at? And those are all good questions. And the food hubs try to address these in a lot of different ways. But the aggregation and packaging and distribution there's some economies of scale that are created through something like a food hub that makes it work a little bit better for both the farmer and for the consumer. So for instance, a farmer may not be able to service a food service account like a hospital or university dining service or a large convention center. They may not be able to service that market on their own. They also may not be able to service a market like a local regional grocery store, like in the Kansas City area that Ball's Foods has about 15 or 20 stores in the Kansas City area. How is one farmer going to service all of those stores? So there's a lot of advantages for farmers. The problem is around maintaining quality, the pricing, and how much profit they give up that goes through the food hub. So a farmer has to very carefully weigh the pros and cons of the money savings on time and effort with the price received through the food hub. But in general, many of us think that food hubs, in whatever form they take, cooperative food hubs, nonprofit food hubs, private property food hubs, like a lot of produce distributors have really started to act as food hubs. These can all be really rewarding relationships. Again, think about diversifying markets, Think about the actual economics behind your decision to market this way. Another thing to consider is that food hubs are generally focused on local products, and they may not be as adept at marketing organic products. However, they're very interested in organic products as well.